The blue glow from the presentation screen illuminated Derek's confident smile as he outlined the Tech Global acquisition offer to our 5-person board of directors. The same board where he'd consistently introduced me as our talented developer while presenting himself as the visionary founder, despite the fact that our revolutionary fitness algorithm had emerged entirely from my doctoral research in biomechanics and machine learning. My name is Madison, I'm 25, and I just learned that some partnerships are hostile takeovers disguised as collaboration. This is the story of how I discovered that intellectual property law exists to protect innovators from opportunistic business partners. The acquisition values our company at $12 million, Derek continued, gesturing toward financial projections that conspicuously omitted my contributions to our technology stack. Tech Global recognizes the market potential of our fitness tracking innovation and wants to integrate it into their existing health platform ecosystem. Our fitness tracking innovation, the algorithm I developed during my graduate studies, the machine learning models I trained using biomechanics data from my dissertation research, the predictive analytics framework I'd coded during 18 months of independent development before Derek had even heard of the project. Board member Sarah Chun leaned forward with interest. Derek, what's Madison's position on the acquisition timeline? As co-founder, presumably she's been involved in these negotiations. Derek's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught the flicker of discomfort that crossed his face. Madison and I have discussed the strategic direction ostensibly. She's focused on the technical development side while I handle business strategy and investor relations. The deflection was masterful, technically accurate while completely misrepresenting my exclusion from acquisition discussions that would determine the fate of technology I'd invented before our partnership even existed. Actually, I said, opening my laptop and connecting to the conference room display, I think there are some important technical and legal considerations the board should review before making any decisions about selling our intellectual property. Derek's confident expression shifted to concern, and I pulled up documentation he hadn't expected me to bring to the meeting. Madison, I don't think we need to get into technical details right now, he said quickly. The board is focused on strategic overview and financial projections. The technical details are the strategic overview, I replied, displaying the first slide of my presentation. Specifically, the intellectual property ownership details that determine what exactly we have the legal right to sell. The room fell quiet as I showed them the patent applications I'd filed 18 months before meeting. Derek comprehensive documentation of the core algorithms, machine learning models, and predictive analytics systems that made our app commercially viable. These patents cover the fundamental technology that Tech Global wants to acquire, I explained, highlighting the technical specifications that matched our current product exactly. The filings predate our partnership agreement and list me as the sole inventor. Board member Robert Martinez examined the patent documentation on his tablet. Madison, are you saying that Derek doesn't have ownership rights to the core technology? I'm saying that the algorithms Tech Global wants to buy were invented by me, patented by me, and licensed to our partnership under terms that require my consent for any sale or transfer of rights. Derek had gone pale, probably realizing that his acquisition negotiations had been based on intellectual property he didn't actually control. But we're business partners, he said weakly. The technology was developed as part of our joint venture. The technology was developed by me before our partnership existed, I corrected, pulling up emails and development logs that showed the timeline of innovation. You joined the project after I'd already created the core functionality and begun seeking business partners to help with commercialization. I displayed the partnership agreement we'd signed, highlighting the intellectual property clauses that Derek had apparently never read carefully. Section 7.3 specifies that pre-existing intellectual property remains with the original creator, I read aloud. Section 7.4 requires unanimous consent for any licensing or sale of core technology assets. The board members were reviewing the legal documentation with growing understanding that Derek's acquisition deal was based on assets he didn't have the authority to sell. Derek, were you aware of these intellectual property restrictions when you began negotiations with Tech Global? Asked board member Dr. Patricia Wong. I assume that partnership meant shared ownership of all company assets, he said. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Partnership means shared management of mutually owned assets, I clarified. It doesn't mean appropriation of intellectual property that predates the partnership agreement. I pulled up the final element of my presentation correspondence from 3 major tech companies that had been quietly negotiating licensing deals for my fitness algorithm technology. While Derek was negotiating to sell our company to Tech Global, I announced, I've been developing licensing agreements that would generate ongoing revenue while maintaining our independence and allowing continued innovation. The licensing proposals were substantial, guaranteed minimum payments plus royalties that would exceed the Tech Global buyout offer within 2 years while preserving our ability to develop additional products using the same core technology. Madison, why didn't you inform the board about these alternative opportunities? Asked Sarah Chun. Because Derek excluded me from strategic discussions and told investors that I was just the technical implementer of his business vision, I replied. He positioned himself as the primary decision-maker while dismissing my role as the actual inventor of our core technology. The revelation transformed the entire dynamic of the meeting. What had seemed like a straightforward acquisition discussion became an examination of partnership ethics and intellectual property rights that exposed Derek's systematic undermining of my contributions. Derek, this appears to be a significant misrepresentation of company ownership and decision-making authority, said Dr. Wong. How do you propose to address the disconnect between your acquisition, negotiations, and the actual intellectual property structure? Derek stared at the patent documentation, probably calculating how thoroughly he'd damaged his credibility by negotiating to sell assets he didn't own. I think we need to reconsider our strategic options, he said finally, his voice lacking its earlier authority. I think we need to reconsider our partnership structure, I corrected, pulling out the legal notice I'd prepared for exactly this moment. Derek, you violated our partnership agreement by attempting to sell intellectual property without required consent and by misrepresenting ownership to potential acquirers. The notice outlined my intention to dissolve our partnership due to Derek's breach of contract, while retaining full ownership of the patented technology and offering him a severance package based on his actual contributions to business development. You can't just dissolve our partnership, Derek protested. We built this company together. We built a company around technology I invented and patented before meeting you, I replied. Your contributions to marketing and business development were valuable, but they don't create ownership rights to intellectual property you didn't develop. 6 months later, I was running the company independently under a new business structure that properly attributed intellectual property ownership while compensating Derek for his legitimate business development contributions. The licensing deals I'd negotiated generated steady revenue while preserving our independence and innovation capacity. Madison, your handling of the partnership dispute has become a case study in our intellectual property law course, said Professor Jennifer Walsh from the business school where I occasionally guest lectured. The systematic documentation you maintained and the legal protections you established demonstrate best practices for tech entrepreneurs. The most valuable lesson wasn't about business partnerships or patent law. It was about the importance of documenting intellectual property ownership and maintaining legal protections, even in relationships built on trust and collaboration. Derek had tried to sell technology he'd never owned while excluding me from decisions about innovations I'd created, but proper legal preparation had protected my rights and ensured that the fruits of my research remained under my control. Sometimes the best response to partnership betrayal isn't personal retaliation. but simply enforcing the legal agreements that already exist to protect intellectual property creators. Derek learned that business partnership doesn't automatically create ownership rights to pre-existing inventions, while I learned that even trusted collaborators need clear legal boundaries when significant intellectual property is involved. The young woman he'd tried to sideline as just the technical developer became the sole owner of a successful tech company, proving that innovation belongs to innovators regardless of who tries to claim credit for bringing it to market. The aftermath of the partnership dissolution created opportunities for positive change in how tech startups approached intellectual property agreements and founder equity distribution. My case became a teaching example for entrepreneurship programs about the importance of proper legal documentation in technology partnerships. Madison's experience demonstrates why intellectual property ownership must be clearly established before partnerships are formed, explained Professor David Martinez during a startup law seminar. Her systematic documentation of innovation timeline and patent filings provided the legal protection needed when her partner attempted to appropriate her technology. The educational impact extended beyond individual case studies into broader policy discussions about protecting technical innovators from business partners who might try to claim ownership of pre-existing intellectual property. We've seen too many cases where technical founders lose control of their own innovations to business partners who contribute marketing and fundraising skills, noted venture capital attorney Sarah Wong. Madison's case shows how proper patent protection and partnership agreements can prevent this kind of exploitation. 6 months after taking sole control of the company, my fitness tracking platform had expanded into multiple vertical markets while maintaining the innovative edge that made our technology valuable. The licensing deals I'd negotiated provided steady revenue streams while preserving opportunities for continued innovation. Madison's approach to technology licensing has become a model for other technical entrepreneurs, said industry analyst Michael Chun. Rather than selling her intellectual property outright, she's created ongoing revenue while maintaining control over future development directions. The financial success validated my decision to reject Derek's acquisition deal in favor of independent growth strategies that preserved both innovation capacity and intellectual property ownership. How important was it to maintain control of your core technology? Asked business journalist Patricia Williams during an interview about women in tech startups. Essential, I replied. The fitness algorithm represents years of research and development that extends far beyond our current application. Selling that intellectual property would have limited future innovation possibilities while enriching people who didn't create the underlying technology. The interview became part of a larger article about technical founders protecting their intellectual property from business partners who might not understand the long-term value of innovation assets. 1 year after the partnership dissolution, Derek contacted me with a request that revealed how completely his perspective had changed about intellectual property and business relationships. Madison. I wanted to apologize for how I handled our partnership and the acquisition negotiations, he said during a phone conversation that I recorded for legal protection. I didn't understand that the technology belonged to you independently of our business relationship. What changed your understanding? I asked, curious about his reflection process after facing the consequences of attempting to sell intellectual property he didn't own. Working with other tech companies taught me about patent law and intellectual property rights, he admitted. I realized now that I was trying to claim ownership of innovations that were entirely your creation, and that was both legally wrong and ethically questionable. The acknowledgement was more genuine than I'd expected from someone whose betrayal had been so systematic and deliberate. Are you working in tech business development now? I asked. Yes, but with much better understanding of intellectual property boundaries, he replied. I make sure to establish clear agreements about who owns what technology before forming partnerships. And I never claim ownership of innovations I didn't create. 2 years later, my company had become a recognized leader in fitness technology with partnerships across health, wellness, and medical applications. The algorithm Derek had tried to sell to Tech Global was now licensed to dozens of companies while remaining under my control for future development. Madison's success story demonstrates that technical innovators can thrive when they maintain ownership of their intellectual property, said Dr. Jennifer Walsh during a conference on women in technology entrepreneurship. Her case shows that proper legal protection and business strategy can overcome partnership, betrayals, and create sustainable success. The most meaningful recognition came from other technical entrepreneurs who cited my case as inspiration for protecting their own intellectual property while building collaborative business relationships. Your experience taught me to patent my core algorithms before seeking business partners, wrote software engineer Lisa Martinez during correspondence about intellectual property strategy. I've established clear agreements about technology ownership that prevent the kind of appropriation you experienced. The educational impact had grown beyond individual protection into systematic improvements in how entrepreneurship programs taught intellectual property law and partnership structures for technology startups. We now require mandatory intellectual property law courses for all students in our entrepreneurship program, explained Program Director Dr. Robert Kim. Madison's case demonstrated that technical founders need legal knowledge to protect their innovations from appropriation by business partners. 3 years after the initial partnership betrayal, I was invited to serve on advisory boards for startup accelerators and venture capital firms, helping evaluate intellectual property structures and founder equity arrangements for technology companies. Your experience with partnership disputes has given you unique insight into protecting technical innovators, said Accelerator Director Patricia Chun. The frameworks you've developed for intellectual property protection have become standard practice for companies in our portfolio. The most unexpected development was receiving a request from Tech Global to license my fitness algorithm technology, the same company Derek had tried to sell my intellectual property to without my consent. We're interested in licensing your fitness tracking technology for integration into our health platform, said Tech Global VP Michael Rodriguez during negotiations. Our research team believes your algorithm represents the most advanced approach to predictive fitness analytics currently available. The licensing deal that resulted was substantially more lucrative than the acquisition Derek had originally negotiated, while preserving my ownership of the core technology and allowing continued innovation development. Sometimes the best response to business betrayal isn't destroying the person who betrayed you, but building success that demonstrates the value of what they tried to steal while establishing better protection for other innovators facing similar exploitation. Derek had attempted to appropriate my technology because he didn't understand intellectual property law, but his failure had motivated educational changes that protected countless other technical entrepreneurs from partnership betrayals. The young woman he'd dismissed as too emotional about her own innovations became a leader in intellectual property protection whose legal victory helped establish stronger frameworks for protecting technical founders from business partners who might not respect the boundaries between collaboration and appropriation.